I think I would like to try to stand up and speak to you. Can everyone hear me?
Sure.
Yes. You don't need the microphone, okay? Is that all right? So, as Shubho said, it's a great pleasure, first of all, to be here in India. It's my very, very first visit. It's something I've always thought about doing because Jerry, my late husband, has connections with India. But it's taken all these many years for me actually to get here. So we've had a wonderful time. We've been in Assam. I'll tell you a little about that in a moment. But thank you very much for the warm Indian hospitality. And what I'd like to do is to tell you the story of Gerald Durrell and the institution that he founded with the mission of saving species from extinction. Like all such stories that revolve around a charismatic and inspirational individual, you must go back to the roots of the founder, to the circumstances of that founder's birth. And Jerry's roots were very firmly in this country. I'll show you why. It was his father, Lawrence Durrell, who lived in India. His family lived in India for many years. And in the early 20th century, he was a civil engineer, very well known. He worked a lot for the Tata Iron and Steel Company. He built their administration block and their hospital and various houses, all of which are standing today, I believe. And I will be going to Jamshedpur to find some of these roots. In 1925 is where Gerald Durrell was born, in Jamshedpur. And he doesn't remember much about his early years, but there are some autobiographical fragments of writing. And he talks about remembering the wonderful, colorful saris of the Indians he knew that were there in his house. And it was tragic. His father died when he was only 2 years old, so this was 1927. And mother, Louisa Durrell, decided that it would be better to take all of her family back to England. By this time she had 4 children. Jerry was the youngest. So they all went back to England, and they didn't really like it very much. It was cold, it was stuffy, and she longed for India, she pined for India. And the sort of next best thing, if you like, was to go to the Greek island of Corfu. And in Corfu, Mediterranean climate, at least there was a little bit of the sunshine and the warmth of the people that she remembered so well in India. So the whole Durrell family went to Corfu. It was in the 1930s by this time, and stayed for 5 years. And Gerald Durrell, the little boy, this is where he gained his great passion for the animal kingdom. And you see him there with his little tortoises in his lap, he's got little pigeons there. And all he wanted to do was something with animals. And he kept them, and he drew them, and he studied them, and he got them to breed and reproduce, and he released them. And they lived in the house with him, of course, much to the consternation of the rest of the family. So there were all sorts of escapades and things that happened that he made famous many years later when he wrote a book about his childhood in Corfu called My Family and Other How many people have read that book? A lot of you read it? A certain number. Well, I urge you all to read it. It's become a classic of English literature. Now the family said, oh, this little boy, he will outgrow this fascination for animals. Not a bit of it, not Jerry. All he wanted to do was spend the rest of his life with animals. And to that end, when he grew up, they left Corfu right before World War II. He worked at a pet shop and just after the war. And then he worked at Whipsnade Zoo in London. But after that, when he was 21, he inherited some money and decided that he would become an animal collector for zoos. This is how zoos in those days got their animals. They somebody went out into the bush, lived for months and months, brought the animals back, and they'd be sold to the zoos. Jerry got really fed up with this. He did this for about 10 years. He got fed up because the zoos of those days really didn't know how to look after wild animals properly. So just after a few weeks that Jerry would come back and sell his collection, the animals would die or be in ill health. But worse than that, the zoos said to him, oh, it doesn't matter. There are always plenty where they came from. And Jerry was in a position to see this as not true, there are not plenty of wild animals left. Remember, this is in the 50s, and he was witnessing the first effects of loss of habitat, degradation of habitat, overhunting, overexploitation, pollution on the animal kingdom. And he said, I will not take my animals to a zoo like that. I will start my own zoo. There will be a zoo with a purpose, with a mission to save species from extinction, because zoos can aid species survival. So he brought back, he was in West Africa, he kind of saw the light. He brought back his collection and kept them in his sister's, kept his animal collection in his sister's garden in Bournemouth, which is, you'll probably know, as a little seaside town in the UK. And he thought, this is just a temporary measure. I will very soon be able to find a place to establish my special zoo. And 2 years later, he was still there in the garden with his animals, much to the consternation of the neighbors, of course. Anyway, by this time, Jerry was already a well-published author. And it was his publisher who said, well, why don't you try the Channel Islands, which is a little group of islands off the southern coast of England, actually closer to France. And there was a much better climate. The bureaucracy then was benign. And Jerry decided to go with his first wife, Jackie, who was right there. Jackie Durrell, decided to visit his publisher's friend in an island called Jersey in the Channel Islands. They got down to Jersey, met the friend, and they went to the friend's house for lunch. And Jerry said, oh, this would be a perfect place for my zoo. And the friend said, oh, well, I'm thinking of moving back to England and I will lease the property to you. So within 24 hours, Jerry had found a site for his zoo. And this is this is what the house looks like. That's the manor house in the background. The manor was set in the middle of about 25 acres of beautiful Jersey countryside with lots of outbuildings that could be converted to animal enclosures or other purposes. And Jerry just established there in 1959. The little zoo was very, very popular at the time. And 4 years later, though, Jerry established what was then called the Jersey Wildlife Preservation Trust, which was a non-profit organization that then ran the zoo. So any profits made from the zoo would go into what is called the trust, this non-profit, to serve the mission of saving endangered species. And for this trust, Jerry chose the symbol of the dodo, a very familiar outline there, the dodo of Mauritius, which had become extinct several hundred years before. Jerry chose this as an emblem of what he wanted to do to demonstrate the fragility and the vulnerability of the natural world, and also to say, I don't want this to happen on my watch. This is what I'm here to prevent, is extinction like the dodo. So in the very early days of the zoo and the trust, we had big animals that you expect to see in zoos. These are bears from South America. But we also have tiny little brown animals, which the staff call the little brown dogs. So this, I mean, little obscure animals, not things that you would see in a zoo, not what we call box office. And a good example of this is the volcano rabbit from Mexico. And back in the 60s, this species was in great decline in Mexico because of agriculture encroaching on the slopes of the volcanoes around Mexico City. Jerry sent out, or he himself went on an expedition to collect specimens of this species to bring back to Jersey for breeding. And this is something that zoos of the day were certainly not doing at the time. Another thing Jerry did that was pioneering was insist that his staff write all of their observations down in a meticulous and scientific fashion such that they could be published and then disseminated to the zoo world and later to the conservation world. So publication of your results in zoo work, again, that was something that Jerry very much pioneered. And our first, it was called an annual report, first one was in the early 60s. It became the Dodo, our journal of our trust. Now this brings me up to the early 70s. There's a familiar face, that's the young Princess Royal, Princess Anne. She visited the Jersey Zoo because she'd read Jerry's books and thought they were great. And she came to visit and must have liked what she saw because Jerry asked her to become our patron. And she's become patron of our work ever since. It's been very helpful. She's visited our zoo in Jersey many times, visited many of our overseas programs, and done lots for us. But I love this picture because it's only Gerald Durrell who could pull a little baby monkey out of a basket and present it to a princess. Nobody else could get away with that but Gerald Durrell. We also had animal royalty arrive in the 70s. We'd had two young female gorillas, and by now they'd grown up and they needed to start their families. So we got this fantastic breeding male called Yambo, and he was with us until the 90s. And he sired, he was very prolific with us. He sired, I think it was 16 surviving offspring, but they themselves then went out to other zoos around the world to start their families. And I think he's one of the most prolific gorillas in captivity because his descendants now number 131, the last time I heard, back in zoos around the world. But I just thought I'd show you the picture of his firstborn because it really is so cute. This is a Sumbo, he's called. And a Sumbo is now the big silverback at a zoo in Germany. But Jerry always stayed true to his deep belief that all animals were important. All animals had roles to play in their ecosystems, even the little small obscure ones. One of which was this species. This is called the pygmy hog, which I'm sure everybody in this room knows about. It comes from Assam. This is what we have been looking at in Assam over the last week. So the little pygmy hog, which was believed to be extinct. It was rediscovered on a tea estate in 1970, 71, and it just took Jerry's heart. Maybe because it was from India, I'm not sure, but it's something, it was a very typical Durrell species. So Jerry wanted to see what he could do to save it, what was needed. So I'll come back to that story in a little while. Now, that I mentioned the dodo that came from the island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean. So Mauritius was like a magnet to Jerry. He wanted to see the place where the dodo came from. And he went to Mauritius in the mid-70s to do three things. One was to see if he could help some of the bird species that were clearly going the way of the dodo. And the one in the worst shape was this little creature. It's called the Mauritius kestrel. It's a little raptor found only on the island of Mauritius. There were only 4 individuals left in the whole world. You can't get much closer to extinction than that. Particularly when you know there was only one breeding pair. And so Jerry, with a combination of breeding and observations and the kinds of things we do, which I'll come to in a moment, began working with this kestrel to try to save it. And there were many conservationists around at the time who said, oh, why are you wasting your money and your time? It's a lost cause. You know, give up on it. Well, to say it's a lost cause was like a red rag to a bull to Gerald Durrell, I can tell you. Another thing he wanted to do, and this is again is a very pioneer way of thinking at the time, and that is to try to restore habitats that have been degraded. If you can restore a degraded habitat back to sort of what it was, that means all the species that are dependent upon it will start to come back as well. And there was a little experiment off the coast of Mauritius, an island, an experiment waiting to be done. It was called Round Island, and it had been the previous century, rabbits and goats had been introduced to this island, and you know rabbits and goats just eat absolutely everything, so the vegetation had disappeared, great erosion was happening on this island, and the little lizards, snakes, various plants, seabirds, they were all in decline because of this situation. So Jerry wanted to see what he could do. The third thing he wanted to do was to realize a great dream that he'd always had, and that was to use his zoo in Jersey as kind of a teaching tool. He often called it a mini university of conservation. This is what he wanted, and Sharon alluded to this a minute ago. And he wanted his first students to come from the island of the dodo, the land of Mauritius. And sure enough, on one of his trips in the mid-70s, he identified this man, Houston Monroe, who came to us and worked with us for a year. We didn't have any facilities, but he worked with our staff and kind of got the philosophy and the techniques and the skills. And he went back to Mauritius and eventually became director of national parks and did a great deal for conservation in Mauritius. Now, just rewind a little bit. This picture was taken in the early 70s. That's me. And I had been in Madagascar. I lived in Madagascar for 2 years, studying the lemurs and the and birds and various other things. And and that story really is how I got to meet Gerald Durrell. I then came back I was in America doing my dissertation, and through my university I met my hero. I read Jerry's books in the Mission Library while I was in Madagascar, and met him, and then, you know, to cut a long story short, and one thing led to another, and I ended up marrying my hero. You don't often meet your hero, but you certainly don't ever marry them. But that happened to me. So that was in 1979. In 1984, we were celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Jersey Zoo and the 21st anniversary of the Jersey Wildlife Preservation Trust. Great celebrations all around in Jersey itself, of course, and there we are from a floral display down in our local park. But the best thing we started doing in that year was to release back to the wild those species that we had bred for the very purpose of restoring back to their wild condition. And one of the first to go out in 1984 was this little kestrel, this little bird that was so rare. And since that time, we've released hundreds of them, and there is now a viable population in Mauritius of these birds flying around and doing very well. We also got rid of the rabbits and the goats in the 80s, and within just months of the last rabbit being taken off, the whole island started to go green. And with the greening of the island, the insects came back, and with the insects, the lizards had something to eat. And with the nice fat lizards, the snakes had something to eat. And with the soil, the seabirds would come back and nest again. And so it all started this good cascade of restoration of habitat, showing that really how resilient nature is if she is just given half a chance. And in 1984, we also opened our training center, and this is exactly, Schubert, you'll remember this plaque here. Of course, we got our Princess Royal to open it. It was then called the International Training Center, and it's later been known as the Academy. And so that really started our training of people from many different countries overseas. And the Madagascar connection, because I had lived in Madagascar for a few years, we were approached by one of the specialist groups of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which is this big umbrella body, to see if we could do something for the rarest tortoise in the world. This is called the plowshare tortoise of Madagascar. It's called plowshare because of that little projection under its shell. And there were only a few hundred left, believed to be left, in the wild in Madagascar, a little enclave in the northwest. And we were asked to do what we could to save it. So what we decided to do was to breed it first, not in our zoo, because the climate in Jersey is not really conducive to tortoise, tropical tortoises. And we set up a breeding station in Madagascar itself, and had it manned by people who had been studying with us at our mini University of Conservation in Jersey. And here you can see all these little tiny tortoises around there. So really, really good breeding results. But at the same time, we also started doing field work. We're trying to understand what the pressures all these animals were in the wild. We also, in particular with this program, this is when we started our community conservation work. And that was to bring in the local people into the conservation work that was going on, not just for the species of tortoise, of course not, but for the whole of the habitat, and ultimately, of course, for the well-being of those very people. And we started in Madagascar. The Madagascar people love festivals and parties, and we would start with the children, and here the children putting on a little play in paper tortoise shells that they made for themselves, you see. And once you get the children, you then get the adults to come around and become interested, and then to talk about managing their natural resources properly, and then to empower them to start looking after things. And that's how we first started this in Madagascar. It now informs all of our programs all over the world. So that was Mauritius and Madagascar. Islands, of course, we do specialize in islands. But we also work with certain species from continental regions. These are a couple of species of lion tamarin that come from the forests of eastern Brazil. Those forests today are very, very fragmented, and the decline of populations of these two species has just been precipitous. They had been traded in biomedical trade and taken to labs in Europe and America and stuff, and that started the decline. But worse than that was the fragmentation of their habitat. But this particular one here, these are called lion tamarins. You can see why they've got these ruffs around their necks. They're tall, tiny little monkeys, about like that. This one here, we started working with in the 1980s with a number of partners around the world. It was Jersey-bred lion tamarins that went back first into the wild and started to breed with the very few remaining wild ones. And that population has risen from several hundred to now several thousand in Brazil. So that's a very good success story for zoo-bred animals and conservation programs. I can't leave the 1980s without telling you this story. Did you see this? This is our big gorilla Jambo, now with his big silverback. The little boy down here on the concrete apron, his dad had put him on the wall above the gorilla enclosure. And the little boy's only 5, and he wiggled around, fell down, and knocked himself out. And all the people watching, observing this, just were like that and started shouting and screaming. And Yambo, the big gorilla, kind of came over and he sat next to the little boy, and he prevented the other gorillas from coming towards him. And then he touched the child, and then he bent down and he sniffed him, and he was just the most gentle giant you've ever seen. And in one fell swoop, this incident changed people's views of gorillas as the great big fierce King Kong creatures. The little boy, he was fine. Eventually he was rescued and he was fine. He had broken his collarbone, had a concussion. He came back to Jersey 25 years later when he was a young man. And I had thought he would have become a zookeeper or a conservationist or something like that, but no, he'd become an accountant. And I thought, well, maybe he was more concussed as we thought. So that was the 1980s. In 1990, we started with an old-fashioned Gerald Durrell collecting expedition. It was to Madagascar, but it was at the request of the Malagasy government. They wanted us to come and collect specimens of their very rare animals to bring them back to Jersey for breeding, to start some training program for young Malagasy to come to us and then go back home. And this indeed we did with these species. This is the, it's called a gentle lemur, but it's the kind that comes only from around that lives only in the marshes around the biggest lake in Madagascar. And that lake is used by people for planting rice. It's Madagascar's rice bowl. But with the removal of the marshlands, which protect the lake, the silt from the deforested hills around started coming in and filling in the lake. So it was just the whole lake system itself was becoming severely degraded, and this species was going with it. These are 2 little species from the western deciduous dry forest. Very little known. This is a flat-tailed tortoise. Both of them are found in just a little scrap of forest that's left in the west of Madagascar. The little tortoise species. This is called the giant jumping rat, and these are found only in Madagascar, of course. But this giant jumping rat is a wonderful creature. It's monogamous. It mates for life, and just has 2 little babies. So it's a wonderful creature. But because of the fragmentation of its forest, that's what was happening to it. But our main quarry was this species. This is one of the lemurs, called the ii, once classified as a rodent because of its long teeth. Really bizarre. What it does, you can see this long finger here, and it goes along the branches, and he taps that finger and listens with his big ears. You can hear the echoes, and you can determine whether there's a nice, fat, juicy grub inside the branch or not. And this is how he feeds. And with these long teeth, he will open up those branches with the grubs in. He will also open up coconuts and sugarcane. So if you get an ii in your patch, local villager, that is a very serious thing. So the iis were often thought of as evil spirits. This was in the mythology of a long time ago. But now they are much more considered nuisances. So because of loss of their forest, they've been coming around human habitation. So very rare, thought to be rare at the time. We've now found that they're not quite so rare. But well, we collected all those animals, brought them back to Jersey, and began breeding, successful breeding. In fact, we were the very first to breed the ii in captivity, and that's Jerry with one of our first born. That trip to Madagascar was really a difficult trip. Jerry was not in the best of health at all. And he passed away just a little more than 3 years later. This is the obituary from the Times. And so many amazing obituaries in the newspapers at the time, and letters that came to me, of course. People were hailing Jerry as this icon of nature conservation of the 20th century, and it really seemed like people were waking up to his message that biodiversity, that is the great variety of animals and plants on our planet, is incredibly important to all of us and to the whole functioning of the planet. A very important message. Now, when he passed away, that was 1995. A few years later, we renamed the trust to honor Jerry, the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust. This is the mission stone, you call it. It's at the entrance to Jersey Zoo. And here's the mission: saving species from extinction. Very elegant mission statement, only 4 words. Most people go blah, blah, blah with their mission statements, but this is, we do what this says. This is our mission. By that time, the 4 main arms or pillars or foundation stones of the trust had been set up, and they're shown here. And this, I think, is what distinguishes us from most other zoos and most other conservation organizations. But these 4 arms that all work together. So here's the zoo itself. That really started the whole thing. But also here are field programs where we work: Mauritius, Madagascar, Brazil, and now many places around the world. Here's our training program, now the Academy. And also everything is underpinned by science, represented by the journal that we produce. But all of them, what makes us a little different is that all of them are integrated. So people from the zoo will go and teach on the Academy, write papers, and go work on field programs. Our field teams come back to Jersey, and they'll teach on the Academy, and they'll work with their colleagues at the Jersey Zoo. And so it all works together. And as I say, that I think is something different. It's now, many zoos are doing this now, but I just truly believe that we led the way. And this was back in 1995. So I just want to kind of quickly cover what's happened in the last 22 years since Jerry passed away. In the same year that he died, in 1995, the volcano in the island of Montserrat in the Caribbean erupted for the first time in 200 years, endangering all the people of this island of Montserrat, but also some of the fauna of that country. And we were asked to step in to try to help. Could we take some specimens, see if we could breed them? The one thing they asked us to help was something called a mountain chicken. Mountain chicken, well, mountain chicken was actually a great big frog, found only on the island of Montserrat and one neighboring island. And so we did indeed take in this mountain chicken to Jersey and learn how to breed it. Nobody had ever done so before. And that's just to show you how big it is. I mean, an enormous frog. It's called a mountain chicken because the people said it tasted like chicken. I don't know if that was true. I didn't try it myself. And I don't know, do you all recognize that man there? That's John Cleese. Yeah, he's a big supporter of ours. So he was happy to be in the photograph just to give scale to the mountain chicken. Also in the Caribbean, we worked with this species, the parrot from St. Lucia, down to a few hundred individuals, now up to about 2,000, thanks to not so much to breeding, but to an education program working with the local people. In St. Lucia also, we've worked with this species. It's called the St. Lucia iguana. People thought it was just like any old green iguana of the region, which is pretty common, but it's not. It's something different to its own. That's Matt Morton. He was our man in the Caribbean. Also in the Caribbean, working with this species. Does anybody have any idea what it is, or hazard a guess? Yes, I shouldn't have asked anybody in the museum about this, because you know the answer. It is indeed a Solenodon. It's from Hispaniola, the island that's made up of Dominican Republic and Haiti. And very little is known about this species. Jerry loved this species because, you know, he liked these little brown dogs and little obscure animals. And we have just started doing field work with this species to find out, is it really rare, what are its problems, et cetera, et cetera. The staff know it by the name Celine Dion. And Heading west, the Galapagos Islands are very famous for its tortoises and its big marine iguanas. But we became interested in the plight of the songbirds, the perching birds, the passerines, of which there are about 20 species in Galapagos. They have become threatened by this terrible invasive parasite that apparently came from Trinidad. It's a little fly, and it's parasitic on the nestlings of many species of passerine in Galapagos. This one in particular is in trouble. It's called the mangrove finch. It's one of the Darwin finches, so very important historically and culturally. But there were only about between 25 and 50 left when we started working. It has been a very difficult project. We partner with a number of American zoos and universities, and there are still no more than about 50. But what you do is you go to the nests and you take the little nestlings before they become parasitized, raise them in an aviary in a suitable habitat, and then release them back to the wild. But that's a really difficult problem, this little fly. But a lot of people are working on it and doing the research on it, see if there's any way we can combat it. Now, down in Mauritius, again, we continue working in Mauritius. This is something called the echo parakeet. It's very similar to the Indian ringneck parakeet, but it's a species unique to Mauritius. There are only about a dozen of those left back in the 90s, but again, with a combination of breeding, looking after them, their nest, providing nesting for them in the wild, we've managed to bring those numbers up, and there are now several hundred flying free in Mauritius. I've just got this picture here. I just don't know if you all knew this. Did you know that parrots are either right-handed or left-handed? Did everybody know that? And they love hot things. This is a hot chili. And they just love those chilies. But also in Mauritius, we're working on those little islets around the big island of Mauritius, many of which have been invaded by, remember I talked about the rabbits and goats, but there are other invasives at work in that region, like the mice and shrews and cats and rats and such things, that are devastating to the native fauna and flora. And so what we've been doing is been clearing islands of these invasives and then translocating these little lizards who are unique to these islands to some of the other islands. So it's not to keep all your eggs in one basket, but I love this little collage of these little lizards. So that's Mauritius. Now, back in north of Madagascar, there is an archipelago called the Comoros archipelago. It's one of the poorest countries in the world, and the people have deforested the land a lot. But it's particularly bad because it's got great topography, lots of hills, and so the erosion in this place is just going to be terrible. This is a fruit bat, from the Comoro Islands called Livingston's fruit bat. It's got about a meter wingspan. But it is so important as we call it the gardener of the forest. It disperses seeds, it does pollination, but it is so rare now that there are not even 1,000 left. And so we've been breeding them back in Jersey, also working with the people in the Comoro Islands to talk about forestry and good agricultural practices and stuff. Because if they lose the fruit bat gone, how are they going to reforest their country? So that's an ongoing work. Here, in Madagascar, remember the little lemur from the lake? That has been a great success. We've been, again, community conservation, working with the villages around the lake to stop the burning or to change the burning regime such that the reeds can grow. We've also, with the villagers, the lake has been declared a Ramsar site. Ramsar means a wetland of international importance. So that's a good thing. We have also, that wetland work led us into working with more wetland species in Madagascar. Wetlands have been a very neglected habitat there. This is the Madagascar side-necked turtle. Big, lovely big turtle. Had been widely distributed in the West, but our researchers have shown that it was in great decline. So we started breeding programs, and we've been releasing those back into to lake areas with the approval and the support of local people. This is our most recent project in Madagascar. This is the rarest duck in the world, called the Madagascar pochard, thought to be extinct, but rediscovered in 2007 in a tiny, remote area way far from where it had originally been described. And it only numbered 20. It was on a lake, but the lake was not suitable for the ducklings. It was too deep for the little ducklings to dive down and get their food that they need from the mud. It was just too deep. So the duckling, they were breeding, the adults were breeding, but the ducklings wouldn't survive. So we went to the site, we got some eggs and some hatchlings and brought them into, in fact it was to the tortoise breeding center, and reared them up. And now we've got about 100 of these at a specially built breeding center in Madagascar, reasonably near to where they were found. And all we need now is another lake to put them into. But the lakes in Madagascar have been so altered by human activity. You know, what are we going to do? So again, this community conservation came in, and there was one group of people who said, look, we will help. We would like to restore our lake. We would like to start replanting marsh, because that will help us with fishing, that will help us with erosion, that will help us die. And so this is what's happening. It hasn't started yet. It's going to start within the next couple of years. So that's really a great project. Now our little tortoise, do you remember the cloud-haired tortoise? This is a hatchling, very vulnerable at that stage to wild boar, snakes and such things. But once they're about 10 years old, they're this size. And you see that, it's about 10. And they're then ready to go out into the wild. And the local community set up a national park, especially for this species, and we have been putting those animals that we have bred back into the wild. So this was taken in 2011, and shortly after that, we found some tiny babies in the wild and did some genetics on them. They proved that they were the offspring of the ones that we had put back previously. So that really seemed to be working. Now, just to go back quickly to Brazil and these tamarins, these tiny little monkeys. This one is called a pied tamarin. It lives not in the eastern part of Brazil, but in the Amazonian rainforest around the city of Manaus. Manaus is the fastest growing city in the world, so deforestation around it is devastating to this species. So we're doing good breeding for them in Jersey and elsewhere, but the jury's out on what's going to be done for this situation. This species, black lion tamarin, again it's a lion tamarin, comes from the forests east of Brazil. Remember I mentioned the fragmentation. Well, what would happen if you could connect those fragments by what are called corridors, ecological corridors? And we've been working with our local counterpart in Brazil for 10 years on this particular project. It's 10 years working, planting trees in the local community to bring together those fragments and allow not just the monkeys but other species to move along, birds and forest animals. And I think this corridor ecology is going to be something very important in conservation in the future. And now, this is our little prize here. This is pygmy hawk. This is a baby pygmy hawk from Assam, from one of our breeding centers up in Assam. And I've got a picture of one of the breeding center here. This is at near Guwahati, the breeding center. This is some of the community conservation that we've been doing, a lot of family hogs. And then this is studying the pygmy hawk, the released ones in the wild. And of course, you have to do it from the back of an elephant, otherwise there are tigers in the grasslands around you, so you've got to protect yourself. But we started breeding in earnest in about the mid-90s, it was 1996. We're trying to get the breeding center off the ground, but there's a lot of bureaucracy in this country, as you probably all know, and trying to get this off the ground took some time. But 1996, the breeding started. By 2008, we were ready to release these pygmy hawks back into actually 2 new areas. They've been discovered in Manaus National Park, but they've been released in a place called Orang National Park and Sonai Rupai. There was last year we released our 100th captive bred animal, so those populations seem to be re-establishing themselves. Now, just to sort of summarize where we work. We work particularly on islands, you know that, but also on species that are critically endangered. And some of these, where the little dodo symbol is, shows where we're working. It's about 50 projects, 14 different countries. And of course, conservation begins in your own back garden. So here's the little symbol of the dodo hovering over little Jersey, the island of Jersey. We work with our local government, we work with the National Trust, some of our environmental organizations, to look after the biodiversity of Jersey. And it might be lizards, frogs, orchids we've worked with. Most recently, a big project has been to restore a bird that had disappeared from Jersey 100 years ago. And this is called the red-billed chough. It's a member of the crow family. It's still fairly common in Eastern Europe, but in Western Europe, it's become very rare, and as I say, disappeared from our island 100 years ago. And what better thing to try to do and to try to explain to our local people what can be done in conservation terms, in terms of restoration of species, and to work with this huge picture. So we got specimens from some people we know up in the UK, and began releases in 2013. We put up an aviary up on the north coast. These are coastal dwelling birds, and they feed on the short grasses of the coast, which were available 100 years ago. With the change in farming practices and the like, bracken had taken over. So what we did, we worked with the National Trust to try to restore some of the proper habitat, and then started putting out these birds. And here are this is a release aviary. It's called soft release. You put them in an aviary, you get them used to being up there, the sounds and the smells and that sort of thing. And then you just open the door. If they want to go out, they can. If they didn't want to stay in and eat the food you give them, they can. But gradually they all go out. They all come back to the aviary at night to sleep until they start really going wild. And this has now started happening. And the ones that we've released, we have got 6 that have been hatched in the wild. So altogether, there are now about 35 of these birds flying free, and we are well on the way to re-establishing that species in Jersey. Now, what's happening back at this is the grounds of the Manor House. You saw a picture of the Manor House. Sugar, this is where you spent many happy months. These are the grounds of the Jersey Zoo. Just a brief recap of what we've been doing. That training program I talked about, now called the Durrell Conservation Academy, we've trained over 5,500 students from 2/3 of the world's countries. People go back to their countries in whatever job, in a forestry department or in education or as vets or whatever, and bring to their country the kind of skills and philosophy that we've been teaching. And I'm really pleased to say that we've had a lot of people from India, and I hope we keep having a lot more. But I think over those years we've had well over 100, 120, 130. And I've been seeing a few of them while I've been here on this trip, and it's great to see everyone. Now, we've also started to open up to widen out this academy program. We've got what we grandly call a campus in Mauritius. It's not really a campus. It's one course, but it's a university validated course. It's a postgraduate diploma. It's been very, very popular. And I hope we will be starting more of these diplomas in different parts of the world. Back in the Jersey Zoo itself, we adhered to Jerry's philosophy of helping the little ones, the little small animals, other zoos don't help. So we're working very much on amphibians of the world. We're set by this thing called the chytrid fungus, which is a global disease that is endangering the whole class of animals known as amphibians. We are working to passerize birds, and of course these are all tamarins, marmosets and tamarins. So for everything I've been saying, you can tell that we are a species-focused organization. But focusing on species, I like to refer to it as the iceberg effect. So we saying the species up here, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Underlying all of that are all of these other things that we've been doing. Protect areas, you do research and gain knowledge, train people, everything that goes with saving species. But why is it that we, Durrell, are pretty successful at it? I think it has to do with the principles that Gerald Durrell started working on and believing and imparting to his team so many years ago. And that I call the bedrock effect, because that underpins everything that we do. So we save species, but we work with all animals, including the little brown jobs. Conservation is all about long-term commitment. You know, we started with the kestrel in the mid-70s. We're still monitoring that kestrel in Mauritius 40 years later. Conservation is all about people. It's your own staff, but it's your graduates at your academy. It's about the people that you work with in the different countries where you work. Jerry always said, start with the animal and all else follows. And this is something that we've actually seen happen and seen work. But what what can we say we really have done? What's been the impact of our work? This is an important question these days for conservationists to ask, because we take people's money and support and confidence, and we've got to prove that we're actually doing something good. And our scientists have come up with this graph. Let me show you this. A couple of years ago. Now, it's a bit light. Along the bottom is the year, so it starts in 1988, this is the present. Along this axis is the probability of survival, the likelihood that you as a species are going to survive. And so up is good, you're likely to survive, going down it's towards extinction. These species here, this line here, is a plot over time of the species that Durrell has been working with. And it shows that they are in a good position. The probability of survival is higher, much higher than had we not intervened. If we had not intervened, the line would look like this. It would be going down, they would be heading towards extinction. So I think that's a very powerful example that shows exactly that what we do can actually work. But I always like to ask myself and everybody else who listens to me, what is the real motivation? Why are we all doing what we do? And I think it's best expressed by the words that I had written on the stone where I buried Gerald Durrell's ashes in the Jersey Zoo. And here are the words on that stone, so I think they're worth reading out to you. The beauty and genius of the work of art may be reconceived, though its first material expression be destroyed. A vanished harmony may yet again inspire the composer. But when the last individual of a race of living beings breathes no more, another heaven and another earth must pass before such a one can be again. And that is why I do what I do, why Shugo does what he does with all of our conservation friends. So please think about that, and hope you appreciate it. So thank you very much for listening.